Most of Week 4 is in the books, and it started back on Thursday night with the game between the Cowboys and Giants. And after losing back-to-back games to the Saints and Ravens in Week 3, Dallas got a much-needed win on the road with a score of 20-15. Despite winning this game, it was a very ugly game for both teams, and I think this game shows the concerns for Dallas, at least pertaining to their season outlook. Dallas can be very one-dimensional, and there was a point in this game where Al Michaels asked Kirk Herbstreit who he thought the leading rusher for Dallas was, and this was in the third quarter, and it was CeeDee Lamb who had a 10-yard carry in the first half. Left tackle Tyler Guyton also struggled, and I don't want to harp on the secondary because they are banged up, but the Giants' game plan was simple: attack away from Trayvon Diggs. And with Dallas' upcoming schedule of at Pittsburgh, home against Detroit, and at San Francisco, this is a cause for concern for the Cowboys. The New York Giants have lost 14 consecutive games against Dallas when Dak has started, and one of the biggest reasons for this loss was the fact New York had 26 rushing yards on 24 rushing attempts, and no, that's not made up. 1.1 yards per carry. I don't expect this team to win many games, but I think they are a lot more competitive than people initially thought, and it wouldn't surprise me if Malik Nabers is a top 5 wide receiver consensus by the end of the year. The Bears defeated the Rams with a score of 24-18, and their best draft pick from the 2024 class had a game in Week 4 as Torrey Taylor had multiple punts land inside the 10-yard line and averaged 55 yards per punt. And despite the stat line, you can tell Caleb Williams is improving and is getting more comfortable as we progress through the NFL season. There was a point in this game where DeAndre Swift had 42 carries for 87 yards on the year, but he finished the day with a near 100-yard performance in what was a solid team win for the Bears. Jaquan Brisker also played one of the best games of his career, and Chicago plays Carolina and Jacksonville in the coming weeks, and don't be surprised if they're 4-2 in 14 days. It's hard to bash the Rams down as many starters as they are, but when you are down this many players, coaching has to step up. Unfortunately, Sean McVay didn't have his best day, and I would argue the play calling left some points on the board. The positives are there's a lot of fixable mistakes for the Rams, but the negatives are they play the Packers, Vikings, and Seahawks in 3 of their next 4 games. I was also disappointed with the Rams' run defense, and that's been a theme for them in 2024. The Bengals are officially in the win column after a 34-24 win over Andy Dalton and the Panthers. There were a lot of concerns for the Bengals defense after their Week 3 loss to the Commanders, and I still think they have a lot of questions to answer, but it's hard to be upset after a win in which you put up 34 on the road. I'm not going to overreact and claim the Bengals are back and that the Super Bowl is back on, but it was also good to see the Bengals run the ball more efficiently than they did over the first few games. I think the Bengals have a winnable stretch coming up, but I would argue for the sake of the 2024 Bengals, a lot of their season boils down to next week against the Ravens. The Jamar touchdown will not be a fun play for the Panthers in the film room this week, and that play summarized this game for Carolina. I know Week 3 was fun, but at the end of the day, Carolina is still a rebuilding team, and there was still a lot of positives to take from this game. As far as I know, the Panthers have a jugs machine, and let's be honest, this was a game the Panthers had circled as a loss. These Carolina Panthers are not a pushover, and they are a tough team to beat each week. Just clean the little things up. The Saints lost a game they had no business losing. They lost to a team that did not have an offensive touchdown, and the Falcons also had 0 passing yards on their game-winning drive. Atlanta scored by way of a special teams touchdown and a pick 6, and after putting up 91 total points in the first 2 games, people wanted overreactions such as the Saints are going to the Super Bowl and that they needed to fire Dennis Allen and keep Clint in his place. And while I wouldn't disagree with that, this team has always been limited to me because they lose games they have no business losing, and this is a prime example. They play at Kansas City in Week 5 and home against Tampa in Week 6, and this team could very easily go from 2-0 to 2-4. I wish the Saints the best, but I think this team is very clearly limited as to what their ceiling is. 0 offensive touchdowns and only having 5 in 4 games is concerning for Atlanta, and the throws from Kirk Cousins on the final drive, given the situation, are worrisome. I understand Younghoe made a big game winner, but help your kicker out a little bit, Kirk. Never apologize for beating your rival, especially for how hated this rivalry is between these teams, but with Atlanta's upcoming schedule, I think there is a lot to be worried about in the Big A. And speaking of rivals, the Minnesota Vikings defeated the Green Bay Packers with a score of 31-29 in a game that was a lot closer than it needed to be. The Vikings raced out to a 28-0 lead and were outscored 29-3 the rest of the way. It's hard to be upset when you beat a division rival in their stadium and improve to 4-0, though I think there are very fair concerns that rear their ugly head in this game. The play calling at times was suspect, and the defense was concerning at times too. Jordan Love picked this defense apart in the second half, and the 5-play 96-yard drive to bring it to a one-score game was embarrassing. I think the biggest takeaway for the Vikings is a win is a win, but there is a lot to improve on. Green Bay had 5 turnovers and 2 missed field goals and nearly won. This was not garbage time stats for Jordan Love. There was legitimate concern from the Vikings fan base that they were going to lose this game. I sincerely hope there are no Packers fans deeply upset after this loss, because this is a really good team, and they're absolutely going to be competing for a chance to go to the Super Bowl when the playoffs roll around. The Steelers are now 3-1, and this was a very non-typical Steelers loss. The defense wasn't great in this game, and they certainly weren't generating pressure the way we're used to from a Pittsburgh Steelers defense. It was a rare quiet game from TJ Watt, and I don't think 1 out of 17 games constitutes a major overreaction. Dallas's offensive line, which is who the Steelers play next week, has had trouble so far, and I think they'll be fine in week 5, Pittsburgh that is. I know the George Pickens fumble was frustrating, but this is now back-to-back weeks where Justin Fields legitimately looks good. Whether it's Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, or Sam Darnold, there's a legitimate case Justin could be the next quarterback that is good on a different team that just needed a second chance. I thought Justin played tremendous in this game, and it is very clearly Justin's team. Indy was down several starters on defense and lost Anthony Richardson as well as Jonathan Taylor in this game. Joe Flacco is a fine quarterback when called upon, and he showed that in week 4. Regardless of the quarterback situation, Indy's next 3 games are against Jacksonville, Tennessee, and Miami, and this team has the chance to go from 0-2 to 5-2. I love Shane Steichen as a coach and will continue to believe in a Shane Steichen-led team. The Broncos and Jets played in week 4, and this was very similar to Big Ten football. Neither team had over 250 yards, and at half, Aaron Rodgers and Bo Nix were a combined 15 of 31 for 74 yards. Denver is now 2-2 with 3 of those games being played on the road, and despite there not being a lot of offense in this game, I thought Javonte Williams looked like the player we knew him as once upon a time. I will be doing a film breakdown on Bo Nix after a few more games, but for now, a win against a good team on the road with a rookie quarterback is a win. They sacked Aaron Rodgers 5 times, and say what you want about the Broncos, but their defense is legit. There's no way around that this is a tough loss for the Jets. They needed 11 points against a rookie quarterback in their stadium, and lost. This is why you brought in Aaron Rodgers, so you don't lose games that Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, and the hodgepodge of quarterbacks they've had over the last few years, lose. The entire offense has been disappointing in 2024 outside of maybe a game, but Breece Hall finishing the day with 10 carries for 4 yards summarizes this game. In 4 games, Garrett Wilson has 20 receptions for 191 yards and a single touchdown. The Jets had 13 penalties for 90 yards, and if there's any overreaction from this game, it's that the Jets are not winning anything with this coaching staff. The Jags are 0-4, and this game summarizes my frustration with the Jags. I made a video on them last week if you're interested in more of a deep dive, but there was a point in this game where the Jags had 1st and goal on the Texans' 4 and didn't score. They had a turnover on downs. I would argue out of any team in the league that out of the high draft capital Jacksonville's had over the past several years, they've seen the least return on their picks. CJ Stroud had all day to throw, and he carved this defense up without his top 2 running backs. I don't think it's going to happen because it's early in the year, but I wouldn't be surprised if Doug Peterson is fired by the time you're listening to this video. The results aren't there, they're never going to be there, and this is an awful situation. Houston won, and that was critical, especially after getting blown out in week 3, but there's a lot of mistakes this team needs to clean up. They had 13 penalties in this game, and that was after they had 11 last week. These are fixable mistakes, and aside from that, Nico Collins is one of the best receivers in football, as he now has 3 games north of 115 yards on the year, and he played a huge part in this win for the Texans. Houston plays the Bills in week 5, and that's going to be a substantial test for them. They need to clean up their mistakes. It's hard to harp on the Eagles when they had their top 2 receivers out, as well as a future Hall of Famer in Lane Johnson. Not surprisingly, they lost to a solid Bucs team, but I think there's a few issues with Philly regardless if those guys were playing. I have said before, I don't think Nick Sirianni is a great coach, and it showed at times in week 4. In a lot of ways, this looked like an extension of the final stretch from the 2023 Eagles season. Jalen Hurts' pocket presence can be absolutely atrocious at times, and it showed, especially on the Lavonte David strip sack. They have a Week 5 bye and have not scored a point in the first quarter all year, so they will enter Week 6 with 0 first quarter points. And that's extremely concerning for a team who has aspirations like the Eagles. Baker Mayfield looked like the Baker we've seen since becoming a Buck outside of a few games, and this was one of the most complete team wins for the Bucs in a while. I know they had a good win against Washington in Week 1, but I think Tampa played better against Philly in Week 4. This was a classic good Bucs game. Lavonte David played great, Mike Evans played great, and because of Younghoe Koo, Tampa is now atop of the NFC South. The 49ers-Patriots game went about as I expected, and New England lost to a team that was flat out better than them. For context, San Francisco had nearly double the total yards as they had 431 to New England's 216, so they were 1 yard away from doubling what they had. New England averaged 3 yards per carry as an offense, and when Fred Warner had the pick 6, it wasn't the end of the game, but it might as well have been. The following drive, New England turned the ball over on downs, and that was pretty much it. The Patriots had multiple injuries in this game, but there was a reason the 49ers went to the Super Bowl last year and New England was selecting in the top 5. It may have went under the radar, but San Francisco entered the game at 1-2, and they did what they usually do, which is take care of bad teams. Jordan Mason played good, Nick Bosa played good, and this certainly helped Fred Warner's case for Defensive Player of the Year. All of this to say, from our thoughts we had entering the game, there's really no major takeaways from either side. The Commanders have put up 80 total points in the last 2 weeks, and allow me to summon my inner Chris Berman. Old ESPN NFL Countdown fans will recognize this, but The Commanders? The football team? They are legit. And I don't think anybody in their wildest dreams saw this coming from Jaden Daniels in his rookie year. Hell, this would be good for year 2 or year 3. This win over the Cardinals was Washington's largest victory since 2007. And not only did Jaden look good, which is already good for this franchise, but the run game has taken off over the past few weeks and they ran the ball down Arizona's throat. I said recently that Jaden Daniels has had a Lamar-type impact, and I meant that from a ground game standpoint, not from a 2-time MVP standpoint, but he has. Jaden is phenomenal and the Commanders look great. He also has the highest completion percentage through 4 games in NFL history, even over Tom Brady's 50-touchdown season in 2007. This was a tough loss for Arizona, and this was a total team loss. 14 points isn't going to cut it offensively, and obviously their defensive performance in Week 4 was atrocious. This is a rebuilding team, and it always has been. I just wish they were more competitive against Washington, because they have the 49ers and Packers up next, and I would be surprised if they're not 1-5. 224 yards against the Chiefs isn't going to cut it, and averaging 2.3 yards per carry certainly isn't either. The Chargers were always going to be behind the 8 ball in this one with both tackles out, and it showed in the offensive line's performance. I know nobody wants to hear about moral victories, but under the circumstances, I thought LA played good, and I think there is a lot to look forward to in the Jim Harbaugh era. Ladd McConkey played good, and Jesse Minter's defense is legit, and if he stays around a couple of years, the Chargers will be a huge thorn in Kansas City's side soon enough. The Chiefs are 4-0, but the fear is Rashee Rice tore his ACL, and per Adam Schefter, they have likely lost both Rashee and Hollywood for the year, which means Xavier Worthy is going to have to step up. And that also means we're not in that much of a different situation from where we were last year with Kansas City. The thought process heading into 2024 was they won the Super Bowl with what will probably be the worst supporting cast in Patrick Mahomes' career, yet they're injury-riddled less than a month in. Kareem Hunt played well when Travis Kelce is back, and I'm obviously not out on the Chiefs by any means, but their season outlook became a lot more interesting than previously thought. The Raiders won despite not having Devontae Adams and Max Crosby, and my big takeaways with the Raiders are that Zamir White is not a great player, and I do think Alexander Mattison should take over for him, or at the very least have more than 5 carries compared to the 17 Zamir had, and this is one we will discuss a lot in the weekly recaps, but Luke Getsy is a very, very frustrating play caller. I don't think that Las Vegas is a serious threat in the conference, but their next 2 games are against the Broncos and Steelers, and I think they can be 4-2 as easily as they can be 2-4. This was a good bounce back win for a team that allowed 36 points to Carolina in Week 3. Cleveland has 66 points in 4 games, and I think everyone has been critical of Deshaun Watson at some point, but this game truly was not on him. The Browns ran into a lot of problems quick with injury, and the interception Deshaun threw in this game was honestly laughable and a very Looney Tunes style play. The Browns' upcoming schedule is brutal, and they face a couple of talented offenses, and I think there's a legit chance they start the year 1-6 or maybe even 1-7, and not because they're a talentless roster, but because I don't think they can put points on the board. I hope you enjoyed the Week 4 recap, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 33% of people watching are subscribed and helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.